Welcome to You've Never Seen It, a journey that I am on to never hear these four words again. Thank you so much for joining me. And my guest today, as we talk about the Renny Harlin directed Cliffhanger, is everybody's favorite action movie aficionado. You can find him writing over on Bite Size Breakdown, and he's also a co host of the podcast Everyone's a Critic. It is the one and only JTE. Hello, sir.
What's
Thank
going
you so
on?
much for coming and hanging out with me. I'm really excited about this.
Trying to get my camera to focus. Yes, I'm excited too. I tweeted this out the other day. Like, I love doing podcasts like this because it forces me to watch some of my favorite movies. Because these are movies. A lot of times, these are first time
Uh-huh.
watches for you. These are movies that are just like part of my DNA that I have seen so many times. But I do feel like with 4K Blu-rays becoming like a
Yeah.
new thing in the last couple of years, I'm going back and revisiting these movies I used to watch growing up, and I'm just kind of rediscovering them in a new way because these 4K transfers, if they're done right, they look amazing and better than when I saw them in the theater
That's
growing up.
awesome. Well, before we get too deep into Cliffhanger and talking about your childhood, if you would like to grace me with these stories, but where did your love of movies come from, especially these action movies? Like where did that all start?
I mean, as a kid growing up, in the '90s and late '80s, it was all about spectacle with like movies like Ghostbusters. It was the time of Arnold and Stallone, and then in the early '90s, you got the Seagals, the Van Dams. It's a different time period. You don't really get that nowadays. And watching this movie made me feel like, man, I miss the days when all you needed was a name on the top of the
Yeah.
poster, and everything else was
Yeah.
secondary. That doesn't really happen anymore.
Just Sylvester
Um,
Stallone hanging from a wire.
Yeah, all you need is the word Stallone or Schwarzenegger, and that's all you need to know about the movie. You didn't need to know the plot, you didn't know the director. You're like,
That's
that's
it.
all I need
That's
to
it.
know. Because those guys aren't traditional. They're not like your traditional A-list kind of suave Clark Gable
Yeah.
type guys. They're very unique and different. Arnold and Stallone have very different speech pediments and look. They have a look unlike the most leading man that I think you would get from the old
Yeah.
Hollywood. So I think as a kid, just growing up in that time period, the charisma of those actors and going back and seeing some of the directors, these guys were working with great directors like Schwarzenegger worked with
Mhm.
James Cameron, Paul Verhoeven, and then Stallone. I feel like he didn't work with as many great directors, but Renny Harlin was coming off Die Hard 2 when he made Cliffhanger. But he did work with a lot of like really different directors. The guy who directed First Blood was actually German, and you could see that the directors aren't just these for hire
Uh-huh.
guys. They're people that have actual like visual language with their filmmaking, and I think that's something that a lot of action movies are missing today. Now there are the exceptions like John Wick and Mission Impossible where those movies are heightened, but yeah, it's just a different kind of tone. And I think as a kid, I ate it up. And it's also like those were my
Yeah.
superheroes. Today you have Iron Man, you have Thor, you have Blade and all these people. Back then, Rocky and Rambo were
Yeah.
superheroes. Commando, the Terminator, these were our superheroes of the day. You just kind of I had a Rocky poster because I was like, that man has abs where I didn't know abs existed. As a young chubby kid in the Northeast, I was just like, to me that was like some that you may as well have been
Yeah.
flying or you may as well have been shooting rays out of your eyes because I couldn't imagine getting to that kind of
No.
physique. It was like something that I just held on a
It's
pedestal.
like back when everyone was doing the 300 diet after seeing Gerard Butler's 22
Yes,
abs and not knowing that you could have that many. So
exactly. Yeah.
well, that's awesome. So with all that being said then, why Cliffhanger? Like, why did we have to watch this one specifically?
Well, I went through so to let people behind the
Yeah.
curtain. You show people
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
list of movies, and there's like a lot of films on there that are. There's a couple I had where I was like, you know what, a lot of these would be fun, but I kind of tend to go back to the '90s and '80s because those are the movies I grew
Uh-huh.
up with, and I want people to appreciate some of these films, which I feel like maybe the next generation of film people are just not going back to these films like they should be. And I will say, watching Cliffhanger, I was so impressed with the
Yeah.
filmmaking The camera work, the shot composition, it made me sad because I feel like I don't see these kind of filmmaking in these kind of movies. Like, yeah, you'll see that kind of filmmaking in Birdman, or there's a lot of great films out there. There's a lot of those long one shots that Alfonso Cuarón does. But for me, I like seeing this type of filmmaking and camera movement applied to just a simple
Yeah.
action movie, and that's what elevates movies like Die Hard uh, to a great film, is because the filmmaking it heightens the script, it heightens the storytelling, it heightens the
Yeah.
action really. And watching this, I was like, man, this is just some beautiful shot composition, some beautiful camera movements. Everything just feels energized. Movie making to me feels like music in a lot of ways. That's why a lot of directors come from music video backgrounds, and Renny Harlin came from music video background. And as I was watching this movie, I could
Yeah.
tell because everything has a tempo to it. And I was just really impressed watching it. And I want people to appreciate these action movies because I think a lot of times they just kind of get shoved aside, like, oh, it's just Die Hard on a
Yeah.
cliff. People just kind of forget that these were really good filmmakers back in the day who had everything at their disposal to make these
Well, I
movies.
think too, you kind of look at it as it in and of itself, Cliffhanger is the story itself is a very simple story, right?
Yeah.
Which, like you said, gets elevated with these shots of these people on top of a mountain and this helicopter. And then, I don't think without like transfer scenes, like the stunt with the transfer stunt with the plane in Cliffhanger, you're not getting the Tom Cruise jumping out of the planes and like taking it to the nth degree and like your Mission Impossible Fallout. Like there's, I think I
Mhm.
read somewhere while I was doing like research on this because I took notes, that at one point, or it still does, this movie currently sits in the Guinness Book of World Records with the most costliest stunt of all time. Like the stuntman who did the transfer got like $1 million.
The
Yeah.
plane. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's all,
Yeah.
practical. And I give people like Nolan a lot of credit because he does a lot of practical stuff like this. But nowadays CGI is just such a, CGI to me is something that should be used when you absolutely can't
Yeah.
do it in real life. But unfortunately, I feel like nowadays it's CGI first just because it's
Yeah.
cheaper. Throw a green screen. And there are some green screen shots in Cliffhanger, but they're used, you know, only when they absolutely had to. And honestly, there are times where I'm like, I couldn't tell if like that is that a matte background? Is that actually like
Yeah.
they do a really good job of blending it into the real life sets.
Yeah.
And I do miss that about the filmmaking back here. There's a scene in this movie where the plane had
Hmm.
crashed, and it's an establishing shot where the camera goes, it's a wide shot of the outside, it's snowing
Yeah.
out, the plane is just kind of in the woods, and the camera pushes right into the broken window. And I just thought to myself, man, that would be CGI'd today. Like, a movie came out this weekend called
Yeah.
Plane. I haven't seen it yet. I'm
Oh,
gonna go
yeah.
see it, but I guarantee you there's gonna be a lot of CGI plane in
Oh,
that
for
movie.
sure.
Whereas whereas this movie, I just love seeing all the
Oh my
practical
god,
stuff.
I love a good practical effect. It's why I love, I mean, Michael Bay, The Rock, obviously, but like Ambulance, I enjoyed it so much because of all of the absurd practical effects and explosions and unnecessary
Yeah.
amount of explosions that like for example, because we go into full spoilers, at the end of the movie when Lithgow falls off the in the helicopter and
Mhm.
tumbles down, like I'm pretty sure there was no gas can left for that for it to explode, but it just did, and it
Oh,
was
yeah.
amazing.
And the fact the helicopter was, like, upside down and they were fighting on
Yeah,
top
yeah,
of it,
yeah.
and there's shots where I'm like, "Did they actually hang a helicopter off the side of a mountain? Because I
Yeah,
couldn't tell. And my guess is it's a set, but it was a green screen background or maybe a matte background, but to me, it looked
yeah.
real. And the fact that I was second guessing myself and knowing that when it was made the filmmaking just so much more
Oh,
impressive
for
to
sure.
me.
I remember so I remember when this movie came out, I didn't go see it in theaters, I was, like, 7 when this movie came out, but it was on when I was growing up. It was on one of those, my brother had turned it on one of those, like HBO or Showtime or whatever movie channels, and I was still probably way too young to watch Cliffhanger. So, as he turned it on, it was the opening scene where he's hanging on to Sarah, and then my mom heard what we were watching and came in and turned it off. So that's all that I knew of Cliffhanger, was
Mhm.
watching Sarah fall that 4,000 feet. But like, talk about the most, I mean, just anxiety inducing greatest opening scene that I think the score and the music within this movie does so well, because you're starting on top of the mountain, you're as they're flying through, it's this beautiful music and it's gorgeous, and they drop Sylvester Stallone off, but then the plane lands on the other side and it starts to become super ominous, and you're just like, oh fuck, like something's gonna happen.
I saw this movie in theaters when it originally came out. So as a child, my dad knew I was a big Stallone fan. So anytime a Stallone movie came out, he would take me to see them. I was allowed to see radar movies at a very young age,
Your
and
parents are way
I feel like
cooler
I
than
came out.
mine.
Yeah. So I can't tell you the feeling in that theater. It's one of those memories I have because it was gut wrenching, that
Yeah.
scene, that opening scene. And I think that actress, if you could give somebody like an Oscar for the least amount of screen time, you really feel like she's about to
Yeah.
die. She sells it so
She's
well.
crying. I
The
don't want to die.
the
Oh,
panic. She's panicking, and when being in the theater with I saw it opening
yeah.
weekend. So, it's not like, people went in knowing exactly what was going to happen. It was, you could feel the air get sucked out of the room in that theater. Everyone was just like, you had a gut check. You were like, oh my God, this is so gut
Yeah.
wrenchingly. And her acting, watching it again last night, she is really what sells it. Obviously, the direction is really good too. Renny Harlin several times throughout this movie takes the sound out of the
Hmm.
movie. It's almost like you're putting like your hands over your ears. It's like a slight noise, and he applies slow motion. In this scene right here, it goes from that ramp up of gut wrenching tension to a slow motion shot of her
Oh,
falling. Stallone looking at her, having that one shot of her looking up as she falls, like I think it's one of the best openings of any action
oh yeah.
film. And I think that actress, I don't even know what her name is, but I would give her like some sort of complimentary
Yeah.
award for the best death scene I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it really sets the stakes for the movie. Like the movie is like that's the
Yeah.
opening, and you're just like, I'm 5 minutes in, and like I got 2 more hours to go. I can't imagine where this movie's gonna
Oh,
go.
for sure. I do have my one, not to like nitpick, but
Hmm.
when she makes the comment about like when they got up there, get to the mountain, when he meets with Roker and her on top of the mountain,
Hmm.
and Stallone says, "Oh yeah, your old injury for slipping out of the hot tub," and she looks and goes, "I thought it was an old war wound injury from Nam." I started trying to do the math in my head of when the Vietnam
Hmm.
War was in 1993 when this movie came out, and I'm like, I was like, I don't think that matches up, but you know what? It's okay. It's fine. Like,
Well, it might because I mean it was the 70s. We're talking 1992,
right.
93.
So like if he was
So
like if he was
how?
18 in
Yeah,
1973, then
yeah.
he would have been almost 38, because it'd be 20 years later.
How old was he supposed to
I
be in the
don't know,
movie? I
but
don't know.
like that's I don't maybe I don't know.
Well, listen, in Stallone in 1976, Stallone was about 30 years old. Uh, so he was in Stallone's character's in his 40s in this
Okay, so it's
movie.
believable
So
then. I'll
it
take
makes
it.
so it's believable. I think people forget that Stallone was 30 years old when he made
That's
Rocky, the first Rocky
crazy.
movie. Like he had already was an adult. He lived throughout his 20s. And you look at Rocky 4 when he's in the absolute best shape of his life, he's 40 years old.
That's wild.
So like I think people forget how old Stallone was in the 90s. He was in his 40s
That would make sense then.
and he looked
Oh my
amazing.
god,
I
he
mean,
looks so good in this movie, like, he is like, just that again, that
yeah,
opening scene, he's so charismatic with that little, the smile and his
the
skin.
smile, the
Yeah, that
crooked
crooked smile.
talk, yeah.
Oh, Stallone. And prior to this, he had like, I haven't seen, like, Oscar or any of the few movies, like, I think he had just, like, come off of Rocky 5 too. So he wasn't
Yeah.
coming off of the greatest received movies.
Yeah, Rambo 3 bombed really hard
Yeah.
too. So Rambo 3 and Rocky 5 really did poorly. So this was kind of like a return to box office hit for
For
him.
sure. I also really love a good Michael Rooker with hair movie. Like,
Oh,
I get
nice.
so used to seeing him, and it's always a nice little pleasant surprise, especially now knowing who Michael
Mhm.
Rooker is. Like, I remember watching Tombstone as a kid and not having any idea who anyone in that movie was other than Kurt Russell.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know, like that was just that's all I knew.
Yeah. Rooker, like Days of Thunder, is the movie where I think he first came on my radar, which was in the late '80s. So by the time Cliffhanger came around, I was familiar with him. But he's always, he's never the lead. He's always kind of like the bad guy or the
Yeah.
best friend. But I thought he did an amazing job in this movie, and it's great to see him act along Sly. And I just think he brings a lot of gravitas to the performance. I think him and Stallone had a really good chemistry
Oh,
together.
definitely. And yeah, just and like again, peak 90s action movie. I love the overacting. I love like and by like all the yelling. Like when when they're walking across the mountain and John Lithgow in his very fake bad British accent tells Roker to stay and Stallone to go fetch to get the one
Hmm.
case, and then the one guy looks at him and he goes, he just screams fetch like in his face, and Stallone just looks
Oh,
at him.
Yeah, Travis is just on a. He's basically dialed up to 11. He's just
He's
angry the
just
whole
on
movie.
it.
He's an FBI agent who turned on his and he just doesn't. They don't trust each other
No.
one bit. It's a business relationship through and through. And Travis's energy throughout the movie to the point, even up to the point where he just like F
Yeah.
it. He's like, he beat us. I'm just gonna go kill this guy. I love the back and forth between him and John Lithgow, where John Lithgow is very,
Uh-huh.
subdued, villain, and has a lot of great one-liners, but is very kind of he's
Yeah.
restrained. Whereas Travis and even the guys that are working with Lithgow are all pretty much really exaggerated villains, like just swearing. They're
The
mean,
amount of
and
unnecessary F-bombs
yeah,
just thrown into this script.
yeah. And I love it. I
So
love and
much.
I love how my make your bad guys
Yeah.
bad. These aren't. I don't want cool collected professionals. I want hot-headed
Yes.
villains, and I
Yes,
love
and
it.
I love that Renny Harlin didn't hold back with just, like, killing people. Like, instantly, like,
Oh no.
once we're at the part where they're on the plane with and taking the money, which again, the whole concept of, like, it's $100 million in $1,000 bills that aren't even in circulation, we only use them for whatever,
Hmm.
and, like, just starting off with just, like, we're shooting people in the head, we're going, we're getting into it, and then how literally almost everybody dies. So
Yeah, and Lithgow's pretty early on is like I think they have a pretty good code of like if we can't use you, you're dying, you're
yeah,
dead. Like the guy who gets shot in the plane, they're like, what do we do? Get him to a hospital
frozen.
fast, and they just throw him out the plane. And I'm like, all right, that kind of sets the
Yeah.
tone where your villains are
Yeah,
at,
yeah.
and so I love that. And yeah, everyone in this movie dies pretty, a lot of innocent people get killed too, but it makes the danger elevated. Nobody felt safe in
Yeah.
this movie. Obviously Stallone is safe, but no, everybody else could die, I
Yeah.
feel like. And that's something that adds a little more tension to the film. And Renny Harlin also directed Die Hard too.
Mhm.
And this guy knows the DNA of what this movie needs to be. I think Die Hard 2 is very underrated. I think the first Die Hard is
Mhm.
amazing. I think Die Hard 2 is really good. I think Die Hard with Vengeance is probably the second best Die Hard movie, but it's not a deep drop off from 3 to 2 for me. I think if you go back and watch Siskel and Ebert, they actually like Die Hard 2 a little bit more than
Oh,
the first film.
really?
Yeah, so like I think a lot of people don't give enough credit to Die Hard 2. I think it's a
I'll
really
have to
good
add that
movie.
onto the list. We'll get you back for Die Hard too, because I actually have
Have you
I've
only seen
only
the
seen the
first one?
first one. It's
Okay.
our my husband and I's, Christmas tradition is the day before Christmas Eve, so the 23rd, we call it Christmas Adam.
Mhm.
We order Chinese food and watch Die Hard. Like, that's what we've done.
I don't the day before
The
Christmas?
day before Christmas Eve, yes, and the December 23rd.
I've never
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
of that. I've never heard anybody watching Die Hard
I
on
do. We
Christmas
watch it
Eve before.
December 23rd every single year. We order Chinese food for dinner because we know the next
Yeah.
couple of days are going to be crazy. So we order our Chinese food and we sit and we watch Die Hard. It's the best.
Is that something people
It's
do?
just it's
Watch
what
Die
we
Hard for
do. I mean,
Christmas?
I think it's a Christmas movie. If
I'm joking. Everybody does it.
I'm like over here
I did
like
it. I could, but you know what? Here's the other thing. Die Hard 2 feels more like a Christmas
Okay.
movie because it's snowing throughout. It's Christmas Eve. It's at an airport. There's a lot more Christmassy stuff going on in Die Hard 2.
Okay.
I would almost argue, even though the first Die Hard does take place on Christmas Eve, I think Die Hard 2 feels
Oh,
more like a Christmas movie because it's a lot more outside and it's snowing constantly.
gotcha.
So it just feels
I'm gonna have to
Christmassy.
start a double feature.
And it's yeah, it's Renny Harlin. I mean, the same guy who directed
Yeah.
this movie.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, cool. We're adding it to the list. That'll be the next one. Um, so getting more into Cliffhanger and all of these bad guys. Each one of these bad guys has like the most brutal death. But I think my favorite one, which sounds so weird to say, but when he and Leon are fighting in the cave,
The
and then he just
cave.
grabs him by
Yeah.
the nuts and throws him up into the
Yep.
what is it, stalagmite tight? I don't know, whatever it is. He just throws him up in there.
Icicle.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, it feels almost like a Friday the 13th death scene. Like
Yeah.
it's really like a feels like an 80s slasher horror movie moment. Thing I love about that scene is Stallone before this was always the one beating up
Uh-huh.
people. Because he's either a cop, a special forces commander, a boxer. This is one of the few films where Stallone is not like a trained fighter. He's just a mountain climber, so he's in shape.
Right.
He's getting his ass whooped by Leon in
Yeah.
that scene. And even when it comes to John Lithgow, he's still getting beat up a good deal of that fight. This is one of the few films where he is not a superhero type
Mhm.
character. He is it's more even Die Hard, he's a cop. You know what I mean? This one, he is just a mountain climber.
Mhm.
He is not a trained fighter. And he literally has to use his skills and his toughness to survive instead of his skills as far as martial arts or boxing or whatever. So I think that adds another layer to this movie that you don't see in most Stallone movies. And that's what made that fight so interesting because you're watching it as a Stallone fan, you're watching this like, what is
Yeah.
happening right now? Stallone doesn't get beat up. He should in any other movie, Leon would get his ass whooped in about 10 seconds by
Yeah, yeah.
Stallone. So for to see him get beat up the way he does and then kind of outsmart
Uh-huh.
him by luring him to this one area, and he just used the one thing he had is brute
Yeah.
strength. This guy climbs mountains. I 100% believe he can lift this guy
Oh,
and just basically bench press him
absolutely.
into this
It
fight.
do so much force into the last. Then again,
I
you
know.
talk about like one-liners when she picks up the gun and tries to shoot him, and like Leon just looks at it and goes, "No bullets, bitch."
Bitch. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I love it. It's so good.
Or like the one-liners, the writing in this movie is just I love a cheesy one-liner,
Mhm.
like Lithgow when they ask him when they, kidnap Sly and Roker, and they're like, well, "What's in the cases?" And he's like, "Socks, shoes, $100 million, the usual." Like
$100 million.
whatever he says,
Yeah.
pants, socks.
Ve- yeah, he has a very fun these fun quips and I don't think they feel like overly cheesy. It just goes to show the
Yeah,
character and what his
yeah,
attitude
yeah.
is like. There are some but there are a couple cheesy lines throughout the movie, but yeah, I think Lithgow delivers it so well that like he gets away with it more than some of the other
Oh,
characters.
100%. And like, eh, or even and just the way that he does things, like with when they have after they kill Frank, who poor Frank, like he was just trying to help. He's just, coming to rescue.
Yeah.
Or the poor stoner
This
kids.
man never hurt nobody.
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah, the
No, I know the
stoner
stoner kids.
Frank.
Again, every good
Yeah.
90s movie has to have a couple of stoner bros in it. And
Another scene where he takes the sound out
yeah.
and you just see the gun shooting in slow motion and them running and him getting hit when
Oh.
the squibs are going off. It heightens those moments and makes it if it was just in regular
Mhm.
speed of film, I think it would come off just not as impactful. So that's why I give Renny Harlan a lot of credit because I think he really elevates the movie in certain
Oh, for
ways
sure.
with his
For
direction.
sure. Um, in regards to the Sylvester Stallone's roles, where would this film kind of like rank for you and like of like your favorite Sly Stone roles?
Performance or like
Or
so
the movie?
that's
Either way,
interesting.
we can do both, whatever.
Yeah, because it's hard. I think it's one of his better
Mhm.
films for sure. I think it's probably his best film of maybe this and Demolition Man are probably his two best films of the '90s. Because the '90s was definitely the first half. The beginning of the 90s was rough, and the second half of the 90s were pretty rough for
Mhm.
Stallone, to the point where in the early 2000s he didn't make movies for a long time. He was like nobody. He was making straight to
Oh,
DVD,
wow.
straight to home video movies. So the late 90s were really tough. Copland was probably the exception in the late 90s, where he tried to get away from the action hero roles and he did something serious. Really great film. But everything before that, movies like The Specialist, Assassins, movies that, on paper should be great Stallone movies, but they just don't quite live up to their potential. Maybe it's because of the script. And, Richard Donner directed Assassins. He worked with some decent directors towards the end, but they just, you could put all the ingredients to make a great movie. It doesn't always
Right.
work out. So I think Cliffhanger for the 90s is one of his best
Okay.
films. As far as performance, Stallone, when you can match a great, like, it's all about physicalities. The first Rambo film, he basically says like a few lines in the whole movie until the
Mhm.
end. Stallone is really good at channeling his acting without saying a lot. Ryan Gosling is a huge Stallone fan.
Mhm.
And when Ryan Gosling talks about films like Drive and Place Beyond the Pines, he talks about how watching Stallone and how Stallone would be able to convey so much just through a look, that Ryan Gosling learned a lot from Stallone. Stallone was his favorite actor
That's
growing up.
cool.
Uh, and if you go back and watch the early Stallone movies, like the First Blood films for sure, and some of the other, like Cliffhanger, he does a lot of his acting through his just a
Mhm.
stare. There's that one scene where you said the camera whips and Stallone just kind of
Yeah.
looks. He says like, "Go
Yeah. He's like,
fetch," and he's like,
"Fetch!" So I was like, "Huh."
like I know, yeah, like I know everything Stallone's thinking. So I think Cliffhanger is a different movie for him. It's actually a little outside the box. Because, like I said, he's not playing a cop or special
Mhm.
forces, and the fact that he has this guilt of that opening scene. So I think it's up there. I think it's in the higher echelon of his acting in movies. But also because he had a rough
Yeah.
patch for a while there
For
after
sure.
this.
What are like your top 3 Stallone movies?
Top three, like
Yeah,
all time. Oh man, I mean, I got to go First Blood and
sure.
Rocky. It's just Stallone created two of the most iconic characters of the '80s in film. Uh, it's funny. Stallone says in America, everyone calls him Rocky.
Uh-huh.
Outside the states, everyone goes to
That's
Rambo.
so crazy. That's funny.
Because this goes back to like what I was saying about Stallone. Because he acts so well without saying a
Mhm.
lot, it made him super popular overseas. Because it's not somebody you didn't need that language barrier to understand what he was going through. So his acting, the Rambo series, just really in its action
Mhm.
films. Action films always do better overseas. Um, so let me see. After Rocky and First Blood, that's tough. That's tough, man. It's hard because I love this. Creed, he should have won the Oscar, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think something else. Rocky's, I mean, Copland, he's really good in. Hmm, let me think. This is
It is
tough.
tough, yeah.
The third one, the third one, I would probably go with like I liked him in
Okay.
Nighthawks. I think that was a very different role for him, and he got to kind of show a little bit different side of himself. I like him in Oscar. I think he's really funny in that movie. I think like Stallone, a lot of people say is a very funny person, but he hasn't really able to transition that to his acting. Like Schwarzenegger, here's the thing: Schwarzenegger was really smart because he worked with really great comedic directors
Mhm.
like Ivan Reitman. Ivan Reitman
Yeah.
was somebody he made Kindergarten Cop with, and all these other films. And I think that's what was a smart move. I think Stallone, if he would have found the right actor or the right director, he would have done a good job. But in the one movie I think that he is really funny in was
Okay.
Oscar, and that's directed by John Landis,
Okay.
who is very famous for
Yeah.
his comedic films. So I think maybe Stoll just didn't quite figure it out. So yeah, I like seeing him in Oscar. I like seeing him in Copland. I think he's really good. Those are the ones that really come to mind. Like the movies, like I love Demolition Man. I'm a sucker for Over the Top.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of other films I really like from him, but the two that Rocky and Rambo are just on such a higher degree of everything else
Mhm.
that I have to put that top. I really enjoy him in Tulsa King, the new show that's out
I
now.
we've been wanting to
I think,
start that. We haven't started it yet, but
yeah,
we've been wanting to.
that show actually allows him to use his dramatic and his humor. his comedic acting, I think, on a very even scale,
Uh-huh.
and it's very tailored to him.
Okay.
I think because of that it works.
Nice. Yeah, no, we've definitely been wanting to. Where do you to watch Tulsa King? Where do the Expendables films sit for you? Like, are you a fan of those as well?
I enjoy them, but I know they're not like great movies. Like they're very catered
Yeah.
to me. I think I I think the second one is the best of the
Yeah.
three because Stallone directed the first one, but you could tell he had a limited
Mhm.
budget. Although I think the third one, like really, the action in the third act of the first film is
Yeah.
awesome. I think two was a perfect mix of kind of figuring out. The first one's very
Yeah.
serious. Like, I mean, it's over the top action, but it's played very serious. The second one was a perfect balance of let's not take ourselves too seriously and let's have a lot of
Uh-huh.
fun with these 80s
Yeah.
80s 90s action stars. The third one, I think they made a mistake by going
Mm.
PG-13. um, but it's still enjoyable and has some good action in it. But to me, two is just the perfect
Yeah.
balance. So I enjoy them, but I understand if you
No,
don't because you it's
I think
really
I
no.
yeah.
I'm just saying in
Yeah.
general, if somebody does it, I get it because it is literally a very specific
Yeah.
audience it's going for. So you have to be in that audience.
It's like he literally Stallone was like, "What movie can I make specifically to make JTE happy? What could we do?" And
Exactly.
this
Oh my god, I was so happy. That was like my Avengers when that movie got announced. I was like, my Avengers
that
is
is
happening.
your Avenger. I love that. It's incredible. Um, again, and then doing my research, I thought it was really interesting. This movie was actually nominated for a couple of Academy Awards with Cliffhanger
And on a
on a
technical
technical
level,
level. Yeah, so I think
I'm not
yeah,
surprised at all because watching it, I was really impressed by a lot of the technical merits
yeah,
of this film.
it was nominated for best sound effects editing, and best visual effects, but of course it was the same year
Yep.
that Jurassic Park came out, so it lost all 3 of those
Yeah.
to Jurassic Park.
Yeah, you're not gonna beat Jurassic Park on that level.
Sadly, you are not, but I thought that was so now I
Mhm.
liked learning that. I was like, "Oh, I watched an Academy Award nominated film too on top of it that you."
Nice. That's awesome. I mean, there's shots in this where I'm just like, it made me sad for some action movies these days because
Yeah.
I feel like they're just lazy. It really felt great to see somebody who cares about almost every shot. The lighting in some of these scenes at night,
Yeah.
especially at the night scenes, was really impressive,
Yes.
and
Y
I was just really impressed. And watching it on a 4K on an OLED TV, it just looked
Oh, I bet.
amazing. I was, it's yeah. Seeing, I would love for this to get like an IMAX
I'd go
re-release.
see it.
I think this like the setting for this film would be perfect for
Yes.
IMAX. I wish there was no IMAX back in my day when this came out. So give me an IMAX
Well,
Cliffhanger
just, like,
re-release,
the idea of
please.
just climbing in general and watching people climb, whether it's Stallone or, like, his stunt double, because apparently Stallone is also very afraid of heights, which I think is hilarious that he does
Yeah,
this movie.
just why he did
Yeah,
the movie.
that's amazing.
He wanted to conquer his fear. He says he likes to do films where he likes that fact that something about the movie
Uh-huh.
scares him. So he literally chose this movie because he's
That's
scared of heights.
incredible. Yeah, and so, like, watching the scenes of, like, anyone, whoever climbing up these rock faces and how insane it is, to see something like that in IMAX, it took me back to, when we went and saw the documentary Free Solo back, like, a few years
Yeah,
ago. And the entire
it's really
time,
good.
I felt like I was gonna throw up watching this guy just, like, free climbing this mountain, and
Hmm.
it's so scary. Like, and I think that's the other reason why I really enjoyed this movie so much is it's based on doing something that I will never fucking do in my entire life. That is so
Yeah,
impressive that you have to be super fit in order to do, and the way that they shoot it makes it look like it's really happening. Like, there's nothing. It's like it's like
yeah.
the Tom Cruise stunts that you're just like, "The fuck are you doing? You're 60 years old." Like, just stop.
I'm scared to even go in a
Right?
helicopter. I won't even. You're not getting me on a mountain. I won't even
Right?
go in a
I have
helicopter.
friends that are like, "Hey,
So
have you wanna go skydiving? We're thinking about taking a trip and going sky." I'm like, "No. I have no
yeah.
reason to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Why would I wanna do that?"
I always said it. To me, skydiving is a 50-50 chance you're gonna
Right.
die
And I don't want to.
because you jump out of a plane, right? You jump out of a plane, you pull a
Mhm.
cord. That cord opens a chute. Either that chute opens or it
Right.
doesn't. To me, that's a 50-50 shot I might die.
I'm not
So
willing to take
I
it.
ain't skydiving. Yeah. I don't care what the rate is. 50% chance it's either gonna open or
Right.
it's not.
Right,
I'm out.
exactly, and I gotta put I gotta be strapped to somebody
Mhm.
else, so, like, it's my life is now in someone else's hands, I'm
Mhm.
good. I'm golden.
There was a movie that came out a few years after this called Terminal
Okay.
Velocity. It is a skydiving action film starring Charlie Sheen.
Ooh.
And there also be Hollywood, they like to make two of the same
Mhm.
type of movie. There's another movie called Drop
Okay.
Zone with Wesley Snipes,
Nice.
which is also a skydiving action movie.
What a great thing. Oh.
And Point Break has one scene
Oh,
too.
it's
Don't
so
forget.
good.
Point Break
I love
has
Point Break.
yeah. But Point Break. So somebody saw Point Break and they said, "What if the whole movie was just that skydiving?" And that's literally what those two movies are.
That's incredible, and I love Renny Harlin in, I looked through his list of, like, the movies that he had made, and the only other one that I had
Mhm.
seen prior to Cliffhanger was Deep Blue Sea, and I remember I saw it
Ah,
while I
yeah.
was, like, home from school with strep throat, like, having a fever dream, and I
Hmm.
felt like I was having a fever dream watching Deep Blue Sea.
Yeah, Renny Harlin. He's an actor who was successful in the early '90s, late '80s. And then he's kind of fell off. Him and Stallone reteamed for a movie in the 2000s called Driven,
Okay.
and it's a very bad movie. um, it just goes to show you like where Stallone and Renny Harlin were in the early '90s. They were at a complete opposite place in the early
Yeah,
2000s. A director who just couldn't get him a good movie made, and Stallone who was just making really bad films at the time. So it's sad, and I understand why he went back to Renny Harlin because Cliffhanger was one of his biggest successful films. So that's why he brought Renny Harlin to make
right.
Driven, but just not
Oh,
a good
no,
movie.
that's I know, it's so when you look at, like, the action star where they were, like, at that time, like you said, you have your Schwarzenegger who just comes off of Terminator, and then he gets into True Lies,
Mhm.
but he also in between all of that, he has Kindergarten Cop and
Yeah.
Twins, like, it's just I mean, just there you couldn't have had a better career, and then you have, like, your, Sly Stones, the Stallones, I started kind of getting into some of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies after watching
Hmm.
Jean-Claude Van Johnson on Amazon
Yeah.
Prime.
Okay. That's a
It's
good
a
show.
great show.
That's a
I'm
good
so
show.
sad they only
Yeah.
gave it 1 season because that show was
I
so
know.
good. Oh,
I really
it
enjoyed
was
it. To me, Stallone owned the
uh-huh.
'80s, whereas Arnold owned the
Yeah.
'90s. Because that's a big debate: who's better, Arnold or
Mhm.
Sly? I think they both had their. I think if you look at the '80s, Stallone like destroyed
Yeah.
Arnold, and then the '90s, Arnold destroyed
Oh my god.
Stallone. I so I think they both had they both there's a little overlap there in the late
Mhm.
'80s, but I think if you went as just who won the '80s, who won the '90s, Stallone,
And then in
Schwarzenegger.
between, you get the Van Dams and the Segals and the
Yeah,
Snipes just
which
throwing things.
they're like
Same
they're like the B level, but they're still, they never quite worked with directors like these
Yeah.
guys were
I
working with.
watched,
And they never quite had the budget
I
that they
watched,
had.
I think it was Double Impact the other day, or a few months
Mm,
ago, the one where he plays, like, the
yeah,
twin. Yeah, the
double double the Van
so
Damme.
good. And then I had a friend of mine, AJ, somehow ended up convincing me to rent and watch the Jean-Claude Van Damme directed, The Quest, which is
Yep.
which was the
Weird movie,
weirdest movie
man.
ever. He's, like, running around with children in the street as, like
He's like a pickpocket, and they're like he's like a clown at one point, and then
Oh, it's great.
it's like he meets this. Yeah, the quest. I liked it growing up, but then I revisited it a few years ago, and I was like, yeah, this is
It's
not
not
great.
great.
It's okay. There's some good fight
Yeah,
scenes,
it
but
was wild.
that's
It was
about it.
wild.
He kind of remade
Yeah,
Bloodsport,
but, like,
basically,
for
but
children in a
with
way, with, like
for
he made
children.
the
Yeah,
PG-13 version of Bloodsport.
exactly.
This movie to getting kind of we're talking about Bloodsport and, like, the violence and everything in it. It he Renny Harlin does not hold back with any of it, with, like, the blood splatters and
Hmm.
everything that kinda goes along with it, like, when he is fighting, the one bad guy on the mountain at night, and they're sliding down the hill, and he drags, and then his face turns.
Yeah.
Oh my
Uh-huh.
god, it was oh,
Well, you gotta remember Rennie Harlan. The movie that made him like successful in America was Nightmare on Elm Street
okay.
4. So, and a lot of people consider Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and 4 to be two of the best in the entry. So, like, he had a huge hit with part 4. And he doesn't hold back on the gore either. So, he had his roots in these slasher type films. And then he after Nightmare 4, he did Die Hard too.
Okay.
So he had a pretty quick trajectory into making these big budget films. Again, also starred in music videos. So it's nice to see like him carry that over from the slasher film into the
Yeah,
action
and, like,
film.
just hearing the sound of, like, his face scraping against the snow is
Yeah.
just, like, it's like I feel it in, like, the back of my throat. It's like, "Ugh." Oh, and of course, I was very excited, when I was we were watching we're big Always Sunny in Philadelphia fans in this house, so
Mhm.
watching it and seeing that bad guys, immediately I looked at my husband, I was like, "It's Mac's dad. That's who that is." So, I always love these
Nice.
movies because I get to see people that I don't actually see a whole lot in movies. I don't know their names, I just know what they've played in other things, and that's
Yeah,
always
it's
fun.
that guy. Oh,
It's
I
like,
know
"I
that
know that
guy.
guy." It was,
Yeah, it happened a lot in the 80s, 90s. You're like, "Oh, yeah,
"Oh, yeah,
good
that guy."
character actor. I don't know his name."
Exactly. So if you had to, not in any particular order, but if you had to list your top 3 favorite moments in Cliffhanger, what would they be?
I think the opening has to be in
Mhm,
there. That opening is still one of the best openings in any action film. I think it's gut wrenching, like I said earlier. I so to me, that's definitely up
mhm,
there. After that, I would have to say, ba, 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 probably. I think the helicopter fight, the inventiveness of hooking the helicopter to the
mhm,
ladder to making it so that it lands upside down, and then the fight literally continues on there for it to then fall and Lithgow to be in. To me, that is just a really impressively shot
mhm.
and thought out scene, and it reminded me of Mr. Possible
Okay,
Fallout.
yeah, yeah.
Because that helicopter scene reminded me a little. I was like, I wonder if Mission Possible Fallout took a little bit from Cliffhanger on here, except for those two helicopters. But again, hanging upside
Yeah, yeah.
down, fighting. So I think the helicopter scene. What other scene? I'd probably say probably the fight with Leon in the no, you know what? I'm gonna go with the nighttime action sequence where they're chasing the bunny
Oh,
rabbit
yeah.
and then and then they come across
Uh-huh.
him. And I think the scene where he does shove the guy's
Yeah,
face, the sh- the filmmaking is really good. And then the shot of the guy flying over the edge, Stallone like taking his thing out last second, hanging on. I just think because the cinematography is so well done in that
yeah.
scene that it's just beautiful. And there's one shot where all the bad guys come over a
Uh-huh.
hill and you can't see, all you see is their outline because there's a light behind them and they have their flashlights. Like it looked like it's just such a classic villain like action
Uh-huh.
movie scene. Like I would love that as a poster.
Oh, that'd be cool.
If you just had Cliffhanger in that
Yeah.
shot, uh, I would totally love that. So those are probably the three sequences that I really impressed me the
Yeah, yeah.
most.
For sure. I definitely loved I think you also have to give, I would probably put in I would definitely say the first one, like the first that opening scene, 'cause I think that's one of those things. It's one of those scenes that I was listening to another podcast where they had been talking about it, and there's like scenes in movies that just stick with you. And like that opening scene from
Mhm.
Cliffhanger is what sticks with me the most, right? Yeah,
100%, yeah.
it's like, Hans Gruber falling off of Nakatomi Plaza, like, that is always gonna be synonymous with
Mhm.
Die Hard. That's it. If you mention Die Hard, that's what I'm gonna think of
Mhm.
immediately.
Ace Ventura: When Nature
Yeah,
Calls
yeah,
spoofs the opening of that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
scene. That's how you know your scene's
yeah,
iconic, when it's spoofed in other
yeah, yeah,
films.
exactly.
So, totally agree.
But then I mean, of course, we had talked about it before too, the airplane transfer scene, I think is just
That is a
that
really good
stunt
scene,
is
yeah.
just but to know that, like, that's a stunt that was done in the '90s and done that incredibly well is just
Yeah.
mind-blowing. Um, and then, of course, I have to say the Leon scene in the cave and just the I mean, I
Mhm.
went back and rewatched I watched the movie on, like, Thursday, and then went back and rewatched it yesterday just to have a little fresher, and, like, as soon as that scene hit, I
Okay.
just like, "Yeah!" Like, it was just, like, right there.
Yeah.
Because again, what Renny Harlin does so well, really for everyone that's about to die, is he gives them all that one moment to, like, glance up at, like, the death that's coming to them. So, like, Leon looks up to the thing hanging from the cave. Lithgow's looking
Yeah.
down as the thing's falling. Like it
Yeah.
it's done so like everyone getting like their oh shit face. They're
Oh,
so
shit moment,
good.
yeah, like,
Oh,
oh,
it's
shit.
mind blowing. I love it so much. This movie was so fun. This was a fun movie. Like
Great pacing
Yeah,
too. Like it's an hour 50 something minutes, and every scene is nothing's boring.
it moves.
It's the pace. It just moves. Yeah, it's one action set piece after
Yeah,
the other, and it's just there's no fat to trim on this thing. It moves at such a great pace. Like I'm watching it, and it's over, and I'm like, I feel like I just started this movie. It moves
and
so
it's
quickly.
so good and so well done to keep watching Stallone and everyone's just keep fucking over these bad guys and just watch them as they
Hmm.
get to that again that final like panic moment with Travers and he's just like throwing things and he's gonna just go beat up Michael and it's just
Yeah,
gonna be whatever however it's gonna be just watching like the slow decline of like everyone's sanity as they realize they're not getting this $100 million at all.
yeah, and the scene where Stallone throws it into the
Yeah.
propeller. Like, I'm like, "Yes," and it just sends Lithgow
Yeah.
over the edge. I love it.
Oh, it's so good. This was one of definitely a departure from, last week's, 2001: A Space Odyssey for sure.
Oh, very different, yeah.
Very,
Very different mindset going
very,
in.
very different. So it was nice to have, some more, something more I mean, really fun to watch. Entertaining,
Entertaining,
100%,
entertaining. Yeah,
100%.
2001 is a masterpiece. It's not the most
No.
entertaining movie. It's a very slow paced, very, it's a great film. It's
Yeah.
amazing. But there's difference between a great film sometimes and just great
Yes,
entertainment.
this is
And I think this movie wants to entertain you from the beginning to the very end, and it
100%. I
accomplishes.
would love for them to do a re-release in theaters of this. God, I would go in a heartbeat. Like,
IMAX, yes, I would
I'm gonna
love to
start
see an
like
IMAX.
petitioning for like because it's gonna be I think it's like 30-year anniversary is coming up in May, and
Oh,
I want
really?
to just like pit it. Yeah, or yeah, 2023. So yeah, 30 years.
Nice.
Start
Wow.
petitioning for movie theaters just to
I'll
re-release
sign
it.
it. I'll sign it.
I want a whole like intro from Ben Mankiewicz from Turner Classic Movies talking about it.
Hell yeah.
Whole Fathom event.
Fandango screening. I got you.
um well, before even getting into my letterbox, I feel like I have to ask this because you are the
Hmm.
action guy. I gotta know who, if you could list again, doesn't have to be in any order, but your top three action directors, who would they be?
Mm. John Woo is
Okay.
up there. John Woo, I think, just put his stamp on the genre and is probably one of the most influential directors when it comes to action. Uh, that a lot of people probably don't know. You watch movies like The Matrix, and that was so much influenced by John Woo. There's so many films. John Woo is just a huge influential director. It's one of my favorite directors. So John Woo for sure. Who do we go after that? I mean, John McTiernan, I think, has to be in there, even though, I mean, he did Die
Yeah.
Hard. He did Predator. He did The Hunt for October. He just had some great action films. He did Die Hard with a Vengeance. So I think John McTiernan is up there. And then I think you have to go James Cameron. Cameron might be on the top of the list. Aliens, True Lies, Terminator 1, Terminator 2, The Abyss. Titanic is an action film at second half, and then these last two Avatar
Yeah.
films are action packed also. So I think James Cameron is definitely up there too. So those will probably be my three. I say James Cameron, John Woo, and probably John McTiernan
Okay.
as of right
I
now.
like I just one thing I know about John Woo is his great use of doves in Mission Impossible
Yep.
2. The John
Yeah.
Woo doves as the
Yeah. I think the problem is I think people when they think John Woo, they think of his American
yeah,
films. His Hong Kong films are
where they're
really
at.
another they're hard boiled, The Killer, Bullet to the Head. Those movies are so much because when he came to America, he was restricted on what he was allowed to
Mhm.
do. To see him in Hong Kong, where he was just able to let himself completely. Face Off is the closest American film that he's done that came close to feeling one of his Hong Kong films. And Face Off is one of my all
I
time
just
favorite
watched
action
that for the
films. So,
first time right before going and seeing The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent because I felt like I
oh
needed
yeah,
to watch it, and I think I, like,
yeah,
texted I was texting somebody, and I'm like, "What the hell is going on?" Like, it's so absurd,
yeah.
but so
So,
amazing.
Face Off was originally written as a sci-fi film,
Okay.
and it was supposed to star Stallone and Schwarzenegger.
Really?
Yeah, and it was supposed to take place in the year like 2055, where the technology was made so
Okay.
you could switch faces with people. That so Stallone and Arnold passed on it, and when John Woo came aboard, John Woo said, "I would like to make this modern. I don't want to make this in the future." And by doing that, he was able to get Nicolas Cage,
Yeah.
John Travolta. So it all kind of ties in.
Unabashed. I mean, when Nick Cage gets to just be his most Nick Cage, it's a winner
Yeah,
for everyone.
Castor Troy in Face Off is like one of the greatest villains
I
ever. I
almost
love him
wish,
as
just
Castor.
because of how insane that movie is, I almost wish I had this podcast back when I did watch it so I could talk about it with
Yeah.
someone, but I didn't have the idea yet, so we didn't
Oh
have
man.
it.
And now they're saying they're going to do a sequel, and Adam Wingard, who directed Godzilla vs
Oh,
Kong, is attached to direct it. I don't know how that's going to happen, how it's going to be, but
I have no
I'll be there
idea.
opening day.
Look, I'll still go see it. Like, I got AMC
Yeah,
I have
100%.
AMC A-list
Of
for a
course.
reason. I'm gonna go see a bunch of stupid
Same.
shit regardless of whether it's good
Yeah.
or not. Like, I'm gonna go see it. It just is what
Yeah.
it is.
A-list makes you see more good movies and more bad movies
100%.
because you're just like, I'll go see it when.
When I'm paying, like, what, 20 bucks a month, I can go see 3 movies a week? Why not? Of course.
Let's do it.
So with all of that being said, I think now it's kind of the perfect time to go into Letterboxd and start giving the seeing where Cliffhanger falls on my on its star rating. So between 1 and
Okay.
5 stars. I would
Okay.
say for the entertainment value of this movie and for with what it is, personally, I would put this at this right now. I need to watch it again, but I'm still sitting at like a 4-star film. Like, I'm into it.
Hmm.
I this is one that I can this will definitely be one that, like, if I'm flipping through channels and it's on, I'm gonna stop what I'm doing and watch it, or at least put it on as I'm doing whatever I'm doing.
How did you watch it? Did you buy the 4K?
I
Did you rent it
didn't. We have
online?
Hulu, and then we also, have Vudu.
Ah, okay.
So a friend of that we
Yep.
have a Vudu account with friends of ours, so we'll upload, like,
Mhm.
codes and things like that to it, so I watched it that way. We don't own it yet, but
Okay.
I might be making an Amazon Prime purchase.
I'm just curious, is it a 4K transfer, the one I watched, or do you think it was a 1080p transfer?
I'm not sure. You know what? Well, I'm just gonna go let me look on my Hulu, and we can see what Hulu says. I the Vu
Oh, it was on
The
Hulu?
first time I watched it was on Hulu. Um,
Yeah, okay. So it might be the
yeah, I think
4K.
so, and then the
I'm not sure what like streamers upgrade to
Yeah,
4K or not, but
The Voodoo code, I don't think
mhm,
was the 4K one. I think it was just the regular, yeah,
1080p.
whatever Blu-ray original
I'm
release.
just a I'm a film geek,
I
man. I
know.
have an OLED TV. I have all physical media because at the end of the day, streaming gets really close to physical
Mhm.
media. But when it comes to those deep blacks, nothing will beat
No,
having the
absolutely not. It's definitely
actual
one that I'm
discs.
gonna add to we have, like, all of our
Mhm.
physical when I say we, I say my husband,
Of
and I
the
have, like, 5 movies in
Yeah,
there. So, he's so happy that it took me a whole podcast to start watching shit that he's been trying to show me for, like, literally
forever.
the 11 years that we've been, like, a couple. And he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, now you wanna watch this." I'm like, "Oh, what can I do?" Like, what can
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand. I mean, listen, I'm a dying breed. Most people are digital
Yeah,
these days. Like, you have to be kind of crazy to go physical media. I just started when it was physical, so I just haven't stopped. And
100%. It's
there are some there. I wonder if there'll be a day where technology is to the point where there's no reason to have physical discs.
I
But
hope not. I like
for
having
now,
the
I hope not.
anytime
Yeah,
that we
my
have
my
to
my girlfriend loves doing vinyls.
yeah.
Like vinyls are coming
Oh
back
yeah,
now.
for sure. Anytime that I have a movie to watch for this podcast, um,
Hmm.
and we own it, that's how we watch it. I'll go and I'll grab it from and I always double check with Frank first if we have the physical
Hmm.
copy because that's all. Because I also want to do. I want to go through and watch like I hate that I don't get the special features the other way, right? Like I would have
Yeah,
loved to have
yeah,
been able if I had. I wish I owned Cliffhanger to watch it so I could watch the special features and see like making of and things like that. Like when
I that's
yeah,
exactly what I did. I watched the movie, and when I was done with the movie, I went right to the special
yeah.
features, and I watched some behind the scenes stuff, and I was just like,
That's what we
"Yes,
did. I
this is
had
awesome."
a few back in the early days of the show. I had my husband on for he wanted to talk about To Live and Die in LA, and that's exactly what we did because it's
Mhm.
all about that guerrilla filmmaking and everything. So because it's all we love Shout Factory and all like the real special
Of
extras
course,
that they
yeah,
do. So this will definitely be one that I'm going to add to our collection for sure. So, you know,
awesome.
I'll hit you back up
Yeah.
once that happens and I watch it again.
All right.
Um, well, JTE, with that all being said, what do you have going on? Where can everybody find you?
Just follow me on Twitter at JTE Movie Thinks and check out our podcast, Everybody's a Critic, where we just cover weekly movies. We go look back at older films and the newer releases. I just did a top 10 films of 2022, so check that out. It was a pretty interesting year last year, and I had a pretty interesting list, different from some of the previous years for sure.
Awesome. And thank you.
Ambulance made my
It's
top 10.
so good. It wasn't in my top 10,
So good.
but it is.
Uh-huh.
I feel like you're getting Michael Bay at his best. Michael Bay. Like,
I agree. Since the
yes, like
90s.
since The Rock. Like you're getting,
Yeah,
oh, Ambulance was so good. That Jake Gyllenhaal line
so fun.
of I didn't want genital herpes, but it happened. Like, or whatever,
It happened.
whatever that line
Yeah.
is.
Gyllenhaal's just on a great. He's just perfectly tuned into what he's supposed to be doing in that
That
movie.
line, it still sits in, it lives rent free in my head, just that one moment.
Mhm.
And thank you guys so much to everyone who's watching here on YouTube or listening on your audio platform of choice. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're listening on audio, if you're watching here on the Flick and Reel YouTube channel, be sure to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and hit the little bell icon for notifications for any time we have new content drop. You can follow me on Twitter at Allison Salamone, and you can follow the show as well at Never Seen It FNR. And until next time, my friends, be safe. I gotta go watch some more movies. Bye.
More
Good
movies.
movies only.